All right. And waiting for YouTube to pick up the feed. I think it should have it already. And I want to welcome everyone to Coffee Kegs in Kriegsspiel. There it is. Today we're going to talk about Jan's masterpiece here. He put together this amazing game. It was the Isle of Jersey, something I don't know a whole lot about. I know that it exists. I know where it's at. I did not know that it was a site where battles were even fought at all. And this was a really cool and interesting scenario. I don't know that it went according to Jan's plan, but I don't think such scenarios ever do. But to talk about this, we have Jan here. Jan, say hello.
Hello, everybody.
All right. And I guess I'm going to turn it over to you, Jan. First of all, where did you get the idea for the scenario? And how did you put all this together?
hmm
And then we'll take it from there. But let's go ahead. Start. Go for it, man.
Yeah, sure. So I think Damon posted the link to this map on Monday or so. And on Tuesday, I started to put it together by screenshots. So this map is created by stitching together 120 screenshots in GIMP, which is like a um, graphic editing software like Photoshop or so. And then I started to think about what to do with this beautiful map and started researching. Found out that the French actually tried to attack it several times during the American War of Independence, and one time succeeded actually landing forces there, even though they were eventually repelled. And then I thought that might be, in narrative-wise, an interesting scenario for the Napoleonic Wars, although the French never really tried to attack the island again because it was then heavily defended by cannon towers and fortresses and so on. But yeah, there were historically a number of invasions on Jersey, a number of battles even during the English Civil War and so on. So I think the map will be reused later on again. Yeah, so basically, I put the whole thing together within 3 days. Did some research on the Royal Jersey militia system, where they had the assembly points where these companies, let's say, assembled, and then they would after that they would all march to the capital, to St. Helena there, to form their regiments. But yeah, and some historical characters. You can see here the Lieutenant Governor Sir George Donne, who was historically the Lieutenant Governor in the year 1809, and the Bailey, Lord Carteret, um, who, for the purpose of the scenario, I put in command of one of the militia regiments. I'm not sure if that was historically the case. I don't think so. I think every of the 5 regiments had a captain leading it.
Hmm. Yeah, I played as Lord Carteret, and that actually created a real problem because you created a lot of command friction in this game. And I think the one friction that I had to deal with was I'm the Bailey of the island, meaning I'm sort of the lord of the whole island. Yet in a military capacity, I am subordinate to the lieutenant governor, who takes over during times of military emergency. And I'm commanding a brigade here or whatever of just a few militia units.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm superior to him politically, but militarily I'm his inferior, and I
Yeah.
think you set that up to create some real problems for us. And then the player that you gave it to, a guy we know as Ninja Bushido, he's not a pushover. He is not going to just say, "Oh, okay, you're fine. You can be in charge." And then of course you made the rule that I could only speak to him in French. So
Mm-hmm.
there you have it. Let's talk about this. Why did you do that? Because you could have just said we're just going to have a nice Saturday battle and we're going to fight. And instead you really complicated things. I think every player had secret objectives and all that. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. That's true. Every player had a secret objective, in addition to the team's general objective. Um, I've thought about giving players secret objectives before, and then a while ago, someone gave me very valuable feedback regarding Kriegsspiel games and how to make them more accessible to people who are not affiliated or have no interest in military topics. And because as we of course know, Kriegsspiel is an awesome tool and creates friction and narratives and all that stuff. But if you have no access to the military theme, so to say, why would you play it, right? So then the idea was to introduce role playing elements because there is, of course, a huge community that's interested in role playing. And from how Kriegspiel is run and so on, there are obvious parallels to role playing games. So that's the basic idea, the approach to introduce that into the game, and then in addition to that, to like sort of offer an interesting experience, um, introduce friction and tension within the team, which is, I think, quite historical. Even though this sort of conflict you just described was, of course, fictional, but when we go back and look at historical battles, we will often find that the generals didn't quite like each other, and that, of course, had an impact on how the battle went. Right? Like I don't know, the Bernadotte sort of sits and waits because he doesn't like to take orders from another general and
Mm.
such things. So we usually don't have these aspects in our games. We just have players and all want to contribute to the same degree to achieve the objective, but that's sort of unrealistic in a way.
Yeah, I'm literally having that moment in another game. James Horton's running a game, a Civil War game, and I've been ordered to send a portion of my force somewhere away from me, and I really don't want to do that.
Hmm.
Like I'm like, no, that's inappropriate. Well, why are you asking me to split up my command and do something? I don't want to get into more detail because there's players listening, I imagine. But I'm like, I'm kind of indignant that my superior officer gave such an order, and I'm
Yeah,
I'm really conflicted about it. But anyway, yeah, and that does happen. That does happen in real life. And of course, you did a really good job modeling it here. Can you tell us how the battle played out then? Can you go ahead and maybe start drawing on the map or whatever and just
sure.
show us what actually happened, please?
Yeah, of course. So I gave the the general briefing. So there was a sort of flavor briefing, brief history of the island, and then sort of uh, the theme for this scenario, and then a briefing for each player, of course. And all the players received that briefing one day in advance for some planning opportunities, and especially the French needed those because they had to decide. When we look down here below the map, we have their order of battle down here. They needed to decide how to allocate these troops to the ships they had. That's of course all a bit abstracted because the ship's model are far too big. But anyways, and they decided to, and then they had to decide where they wanted to try to land. And they went with one of their forces here, and then sort of a three-wave landing in Saint-Brelat's Bay. Due to wind and such things, some of their ships got pushed away, drifted off, tried to land here and here. And then eventually they sort of established a sector here at St. Aubin, pushed forward to St. Peter, where we saw basically the only real engagement here when the not yet completely assembled militia held off like 2,000 Frenchmen before they fled to the north. Um, on the other side, the British team had to deal with delays in mobilization. And that's also something that the reason why the scenario sort of reminds me of the Bohemian incursion scenario. You have one team that is sitting there and does know nothing. That's the British. They are like dispersed. And then you have the French team who is able to plan in advance and make decisions. But once they land, they potentially are out of contact and sort of need to operate on their own. In this case, the French didn't because they were all in the same place almost the whole game. But yeah, the idea was that they maybe tried to land in two different spots or whatever and try to cut the island in half or strike for St. Helier maybe.
Hmm.
So yeah, the British then tried to concentrate. They had uh, several sectors here. The northern one, which was under Lake's command, two regiments of the militia. Then these forces of the militia were one under one player. Then your forces, of course, and then all the regular forces in the fortifications were under command of the lieutenant governor.
Hmm.
And they all assembled their forces and eventually marched into a defensive position, like formed up in the north here at St. Mary, with the forces that had fled to the north and which he had pulled over. Then a second defensive line was established here by the lieutenant governor, then bolstered by the forces of Le Sueur, these southwestern regiments, and then you joined with your forces in the column here along the beach. And the French then eventually realizing, after quite some talk, that they probably would have to do more than just taking the harbor of St. Alban and the fort, which wasn't actually a plan, but was caused due to a player objective, this assault on the fort.
Hmm.
um, Contemplated to march across the beach and strike for St. Helier, which really at that point wasn't really an option anymore. But at the same time, Lake eventually arrived from the north and probed forward. So
Hmm.
we would probably have seen a battle here eventually for St. Alban, defensive position here. But once, I assume at least once, Lake would have gotten into contact, the forces sitting here on the beach would have just flanked the French.
Hmm. We have a cool comment here from Michael Hansen. And by the way, hello to me, Live42. Good to see you. Michael Hansen says introducing RP elements where players have conflicting goals was how Dave Arneson and David Wesley's groups transitioned from playing more traditional Kriegsspiel games to their Braunstein games, which eventually evolved into early Dungeons and Dragons. And I just want
Ah,
to
I
throw
see.
that out there because I think you know this, Jan. Most of us in the IKS know this, but Dungeons and Dragons is a descendant of the original Kriegsspiel. So it's sort of like, Kriegsspiel's kind of the grandfather of not only wargaming, but also Dungeons and Dragons and role playing games. So kind of cool. Are you showing us how far those forts could reach? The
Yeah, yeah.
guns could reach?
Yeah.
Nice.
Because that was one feedback I got. I mean, I took several things away from the debriefing and the scenario and how the game went, of course. But there was one thing that the French believed by how the objectives were described, that taking the harbor as such was enough for
Mm-hmm.
them to
Mm-hmm.
achieve. But I would say even if Elizabeth's castle can only reach to here, you're not going to easily sail in and out to the harbor of St. Alban at high flood
Yeah.
or high tide to bring in troops and supplies. That's not going to happen, especially as there are British ships here that can operate in cover of this fortress, and the Channel Fleet is not far away, anyways.
Could they have landed at Groville Bay there in the east?
They could, yeah. I would have assumed that they would try to,
Yeah.
or if not there, then probably further to the north. So St. Catherine's Bay, for example, looks pretty good as a landing spot. Um, here's an area in between those Metallo towers which you could use for a surprise landing. Historically, the only successful landing the French did was down here at Le Rac,
Hmm.
surprisingly, because this, as you can see, the area here is quite rocky once the water is away at low tide. So yeah, but Brelat's Bay, of course, is a natural landing point. Historically, the French also tried at St. Owen's Bay, so that's also a natural landing point. There are some smaller ones on the northern shore, although the northern shoreline is really rough, high cliffs.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
even if you can at low tide use these small beaches there, here and maybe over here, these, you will have a hard time to get up the cliffs and get your men into action quickly,
Yeah.
which is for the French team the key aspect, right? You want to land undetected and then really quickly strike against the enemy.
Right. Um, we're going to talk next about kind of the lessons learned here, but before we do that, I imagine people who are watching this and seeing this module for the first time are wondering what the heck are these little iPads or whatever around the edge of the map. Do you care to tell us about those, Jan?
Sure. As I was researching the history and the terrain and of Jersey, because I didn't know much about it myself, I went to Google Maps first, and then I thought, man, how cool would it be to know how this castle actually looks like and the terrain around it? Elizabeth Castle was there, and then I went and took a look at Google Street View,
Hmm.
and you can see, for example, down here on this tablet there is Elizabeth Castle at low tide, so you get an idea what the terrain is and how the walls are, how big it is, and all that stuff. And from there, I figured, well, that's quite interesting. Why not provide that for all the forts and the beaches, the potential landing points, and add some information for the players to take a look at? Which, of course, could everybody do during our games, but I don't think that's common to do. So why not? Why not push the people in the right direction? You know.
Right. Well, I'll run a little commercial here and let everyone know you can get the module from our website. Go to kriegsspiel.org, and if you go to resources and click modules for tabletop simulator, you'll be able to go to our modules page, click module collection, and you'll be able to check this module out yourself. Now, I don't know if it's included in here yet, but
Not
it
yet.
yeah, but it will be added,
Yes.
and you'll be able to go in there and check out this really cool module. You can also find the module on our Discord. So if you're already in the IKS and you are on the Discord, you'll be able to find the module. Okay, Otto has a question for you, Jan. Um, he says, did you get any ideas for system improvements regarding the
Hmm.
Ottovsky system since you used that rule set for this game?
Hmm. That's a very good question. So, first of all, the problem was that the because of the scale of all this, these units are sort of pretty small, and even the French have pretty small units number-wise. Most of their battalions are 250 men. Only this one regiment, which to some does look like a brigade, is a field regiment of the Army of the Rhine, about 2,000 men strong. So, um, and usually we have like bigger battalions, or assumed to be bigger battalions, and they do not resemble the actual manpower strength. But I
Mm-hmm.
figured that would be needed to not have the whole map covered by just a few companies, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I went with the smaller pieces, which then meant, though, that they could not be reduced anymore when they took casualties. So we had to work a little bit around that, use the broken status that these daemon scripted pieces have, and such.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to take into consideration if you want to run a scenario with such a small scale of units.
Well,
Then combat-wise,
go ahead.
I would say the dice worked perfectly fine. Um, it worked also perfectly fine that the players only had so few pieces. At least that's what they said after the game. Um, and the only real thing, but that's of course not designed in the system, is like fortress and ship combat. Of course, I tried to use the artillery dice or the artillery die, but the results didn't really make any sense for most of the times. And then also like infantry against fort attack. How do you count that?
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So of course the units in the fort have advantage, but is that all? Aren't they stronger than just advantage? And so
Hmm.
so there was some fudging involved in these cases, I must say.
Well, that's the
Yeah.
role of the umpire, though, and
Yeah.
the fact that you were able to just kind of do what we say in English, roll with the punches, meaning you were able to keep up and handle the problems as they arose and
Hmm.
keep the game moving. That speaks to your competence as an umpire. And that actually happens all the time. You know, Otto, I'm sure when he's running his own system and he's umpiring games, I would guarantee that he runs into situations that are not exactly covered by his
Hmm.
existing rule set and he has to improvise.
Yeah.
And that happens to me. I've got my rule set, the K22 system. It's got like 70 pages of rules now. It's ridiculous. It was supposed to be this short, little, simple system. It's become, just as complex as Reeswitz, I think. But the thing is I still run into situations where how do I manage this? This is a little
Hmm.
different, you know.
Yeah.
But that's the role of the umpire. You know, you can't codify everything in any rule set. It's just not going to happen. And so ultimately we end up in these situations. But that's also the beauty of Kriegsspiel, is that even if you're a player and you get a hold of the rules and you become a rules master, you even become a rules lawyer, you're still going to run into situations where the umpire rules and you just don't know how something is going to go. And I think that makes this such an unusual but compelling experience. Um, let's take a look here real quick. Achilles said he liked the little iPads, is what I'm calling them, the little tablets.
Hmm.
He said that they provided context. Michael Hansen liked them. And there you go. Okay, let's see here. Think ARP says cracking scenario, loads of fun. Oh, it's a compliment. I don't know. I didn't understand the slang. Cracking scenario. Not a word we use here in California for to describe things, but that's kind of cool. Different slang. That's all. Um, did you learn some lessons from all of this? I mean, I think we kind of talked about how you had to improvise.
Hmm.
Um, there were, I mean, one of the problems that I think a lot of people pointed out was most of the players were playing what we call marching simulator, which means we just
Yes.
marched across the map. Now, I
Hmm.
don't mind that, and I actually talked about that in my live stream that I'm doing marching simulator. I even had time for a couple naps. Um, long story, but um, it was okay, because sometimes that's what happens. Sometimes you have that player who's playing Marching Simulator, but then they arrive at the very end, like the Prussians at Waterloo, and they arrive in a key position and they turn the tide of battle. That
Hmm.
happens, and that you have a potential to be in that role when you are playing Kriegspiel. I know as umpires we want to minimize that for the players, right? We want the players to get in, get some dice thrown, and get them some combat results because everybody thinks, oh, it's Kriegspiel, it's about war, and let's go
Yeah.
shoot the enemy. But a lot of times I feel the maneuver element is far more compelling. But yeah, I think you got some kind of light criticism for some of that.
Hmm.
Personally, I
Yeah.
don't think you should feel bad about it. I think it was a hit. But I kind of
Yeah.
want to get your take on the overall scenario. What do you think? Was it a big success in your opinion? Were there things you would have done differently, or would you just do it exactly the way you did it before?
So first of all, Kriegsspiel is a learning experience for all of us. even for the umpires. So I appreciate the criticism. That's of course, I mean, expected from everybody to give criticism. So that's all right. That's very good. Yes, I would change a few things. I would. So the criticism was that the objective for the French team was sort of, I don't know, too exact or too vague at the same time. I mentioned that the with the port already. So I will have to work on formulating the objective differently. I would probably even change the objective, the overall objective for the French, completely, like to something of like control the island or control St. Helier Bay, which includes the forts at some point and the harbors, something like that maybe, or I don't know, destroy the enemy army, something like that. And then I would probably also force the French to try a different or two landing points at the same time. Um, I had hoped that would happen, but the only thing, the only flanking attack sort of came from over there. Because the player that landed there at St. Owen's Bay had a secret objective to land at a different spot and flank the enemy, um, which he sort of did. But yeah, I had something different in mind with that. Um, and also, the secret objective of the overall French commander made him overly cautious and defensive. I think that's also something to change, or at least give the Third Regiment commander, who has the biggest force, a much more aggressive objective, and like make the corps commander then run after him and try to get him under control or something like that. Um, yeah, and I also think, although all the assistant umpires really did an awesome job, great job that day, um, none of them had umpired before, so that's quite awesome. Nonetheless, I think half an hour pre-game introduction is a bit short. Maybe 1 hour is better to sort of get into all the little details, or at least those factors and things the assistant umpires need to know and explain them how to practically do them.
Hmm. Well,
So
that's.
everything that's included, like give a timestamp with the screenshot, how to take the screenshot,
Mhm.
how you give reports to the players and such things. But in the end, I mean, it worked out pretty well. So that's good.
Yeah, no, it was great. I think it's actually a big hit. And I love the module. The module looks amazing. And it always seems to start that we're wandering around, whether it be looking at an atlas in a bookstore or we see a framed print somewhere of a map. We always see
Mhm.
a map and we think, wow, I could run a Kriegsspiel on that, and it starts.
Yeah.
And it looks like this happened here too. It always starts with seeing a map. Okay, we got one or
Yeah.
two quick comments here. Okay, thanks, Michael, for calling me out. He says Marshall snoring around 53 minutes in on the live stream was next level role playing as the British before their early morning French surprise. And yeah, I had such a rough night. Folks don't know, but I've got a lot going on, and I had only got a few hours sleep, but I was not going to miss the game. But yeah, I dozed off, I think twice mid game, and I guess I forgot to mute the mic, but it happens. Um, so yes, it was role playing. I did it on purpose. It was role playing. Andrew says Juan did really well for his first attempt. I wouldn't have known it. And Juan was actually my umpire as well. And I also want to add, I want to echo what Andrew said here. That I didn't know that this was Juan's first time. He did such a competent job umpiring that he seemed like an old hand at it. So again, that's a great testament to you, Jan. And you have my compliments for a fantastic game. I think we'll submit this to the Masters for your Master Umpire interview. I think we kind of hit all the bases there. and we'll see if they agree to elect you to the rank of Master Umpire. Personally, I feel you've earned it. So
Thank
there
you.
we have it. Well, I want to
Thanks.
thank everyone for being here, and that's kind of all for now. We are going to be back next Saturday and Sunday. There'll be another Saturday battle. Please come out and play with us. And of course, on Sunday, we'll have another episode of Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegsspiel. Jan, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Marshall. Take care.
You got it. All right, folks, we will see you on the next adventure.